You click because you remember when a new car in Britain didn't cost more than your first house. Here's the truth nobody at the showroom will tell you. More than 20 car brands have quietly slipped out of Britain in the last 20 years, and the biggest wave left as ordinary families simply stopped being able to afford them. This isn't a story about bad cars. It's a story about a market that priced out its own customers and the names that couldn't survive it. Stay with me, because near the end, I'll show you something from a 1962 motoring survey and a set of figures from the Society of Motor Manufacturers and Traders that explains exactly why the cheap, honest little car all but disappeared from British roads. And I'll tell you which vanished badges you can still drive and service for almost nothing today. I remember standing on a forecourt in the Midlands, must have been the early 2000s, looking at a small silver hatchback with a badge I half recognized. The salesman told me the brand would be everywhere in 10 years. I nodded. I believed him. That badge is gone now, and so is the dealership, and so is the salesman. I didn't understand then what I was looking at. I do now. Let me take you through it, one lost name at a time, because each one tells you something about what happened to your money. Start with Daewoo. If you were driving in the 1990s, you saw them everywhere. This was a Korean brand that arrived in Britain in 1995 with a genuinely clever idea. No pushy salesman, no haggling, fixed prices, free servicing thrown in, and a straight deal. Ordinary people loved it, because ordinary people were tired of being squeezed. For a few years it worked beautifully, but by 2002 the parent company had collapsed in Korea. General Motors bought the pieces, and by 2005 the Daewoo name was quietly wiped off British forecourts and replaced with Chevrolet badges. A brand that built its whole reputation on being fair to the little guy was gone inside a decade, and here's what should stop you. The very thing that made Daewoo popular, honest, low pricing, is the thing the modern market decided it couldn't afford to offer you anymore. Because Chevrolet, the badge that replaced it, didn't last either. General Motors pushed Chevrolet across Europe as its value brand, the affordable American name for the budget-minded British buyer. The Aveo, the Spark, the Cruise. Cheerful, cheap, no nonsense. Then, at the end of 2013, General Motors announced it was pulling Chevrolet out of Europe entirely, and by 2015, the mainstream Chevrolet range was gone from Britain. The official reason was that it didn't want Chevrolet competing with its own Vauxhall and Opel brands. But read between the lines, the cheap end of the market was getting harder and harder to make money on, and the accountants decided the budget buyer wasn't worth chasing. That's the pattern I want you to watch for. It repeats again and again. Take Daihatsu. This was a Japanese specialist in tiny, tough, genuinely affordable cars. The Charade, the Quarry, the Terios, little machines that sipped fuel and refused to die. Daihatsu had been selling in Britain since the 1960s. But in 2011, the company announced it was withdrawing from the entire European market, and by early 2013, it stopped selling cars in Britain altogether. The reason given was the strong Japanese yen and weak European sales. Translate that, and it means this. It could no longer make a profit selling small, cheap cars to British families when the numbers were tight. So it walked away from the people who most needed a small, cheap car. Now here's where I started paying real attention, because it wasn't just one company. It was a stampede for the exits, all at the affordable end. Proton left too. This was Malaysia's national car maker, and for a while it owned Lotus of all things. Proton sold plain, cheap, practical saloons and hatchbacks in Britain through the 1990s and 2000s. Nothing glamorous, just cheap wheels that got you to work. By around 2014, Proton had effectively vanished from British showrooms. Its sister brand, Perodua, another Malaysian budget maker, had already pulled out of the United Kingdom a few years earlier, around 2010. Two brands whose entire reason to exist was affordability, gone within a few years of each other. Are you seeing it yet? The cheap cars didn't just get more expensive. The companies that made cheap cars gave up on Britain. Therefore, we have to ask who was left and what happened to them, because it wasn't only the budget names that fell. Look at Rover. This one hurts, because it was ours. Rover and MG, under the MG Rover Group, was the last mass-market British-owned car maker. The plant at Longbridge in Birmingham had been building cars since 1905. Generations of families worked there. Then in April of 2005, MG Rover collapsed, just like that. Around 6,000 people lost their jobs almost overnight. The MG name was later bought by a Chinese company, SAIC, and revived, and today MG actually sells well again. But the old Rover, the British Rover, the one your father might have driven with quiet pride, died in 2005. What killed it, at the root, was that it couldn't sell enough cars at a price that both covered its costs and that ordinary buyers would pay. That gap between what a car costs to make properly and what a normal family can afford is the whole story of this video. Because these brands didn't just fail on their own, the whole shape of the market was being pushed, deliberately, in one direction, away from the small, simple, affordable car and toward the large, complex, expensive one. And there's a reason for that, a reason that has everything to do with profit and almost nothing to do with what you and I actually need. Think about it. A car maker earns far more money on a big, shiny crossover with heated seats and a giant screen than it does on a plain little runabout. The profit margin on the expensive car is enormous. The profit margin on the cheap car is razor thin. So over the last 20 years, the industry quietly steered its factories, its advertising, and its dealers toward the expensive stuff. The cheap cars were allowed to wither. Model by model, they were dropped and never replaced. And every brand that refused to play that game, every brand built around affordability, found itself squeezed out. That's not a conspiracy theory. That's just what the sales figures show. The best-selling shape in Britain shifted from the small hatchback to the crossover, and the average price of a new car climbed and climbed far faster than wages ever did. But hold that thought, because I want to show you the names that got caught in this exact trap, one after another. Chrysler. The American giant sold cars in Britain for decades, the big, comfortable saloons, the people carriers like the Voyager that families genuinely loved. But by 2017, Chrysler had effectively pulled out of the United Kingdom and Europe, its range whittled down to almost nothing and then dropped. Its sister brand Dodge, with its muscular, thirsty machines, had already given up on official British sales years earlier, around 2010, and Lancia, the storied Italian marque with a racing history going back to the 1950s, was pulled from right-hand drive markets like Britain around 2015, surviving only as a single model sold in Italy. 3 names, 1 corporate family, all retreating from Britain within a few years. Then there's Hummer. Now, Hummer was never affordable, and that's the point. It was the ultimate symbol of the big, thirsty, expensive machine. General Motors shut the whole brand down in 2010. Even the most extreme end of the market wasn't safe. When money got tight, the giant gas guzzler was the first thing families and buyers walked away from. And Cadillac, America's luxury badge, tried repeatedly to crack Britain and never really managed it, quietly winding down its official presence here in the middle 2010s. The American brands, one after another, discovered that the British buyer either couldn't afford them or wouldn't pay for them. So who did that leave? A handful of Japanese and Korean makers who'd built their whole business on value, and even they started to buckle. Which brings me to a name that genuinely surprised me when it started to fade. Mitsubishi. This was a brand with a rock-solid reputation, the Shogun that could climb anything, the Lancer that rally fans worshipped, the Outlander plug-in that became one of Britain's best-selling hybrids. Serious engineering, real loyalty. Yet in 2020, Mitsubishi announced it would pause introducing new models in Europe, effectively beginning a long, slow withdrawal. A brand that once felt permanent suddenly looked temporary. The reason again came down to money. The cost of developing new cars for tightening rules had climbed so high that a mid-size maker simply couldn't spread it across enough sales. I want to stop here, because I know exactly what some of you are thinking right now. You're thinking this is all very interesting, but it's just a list of dead badges, and it doesn't help you, because you're not in the market for a shiny new car anyway, and you certainly can't afford one. Maybe you're on a fixed income. Maybe every price rise lands on you harder than it used to. This next part is for you especially. So lean in. And that gap swallowed a name that stood for something even bigger than Rover. If you've been feeling this gap in other areas of your life, not just cars, but housing, wages, the cost of simply getting by, then you might want to know that I've gone much deeper on the mechanics of how ordinary people get systematically priced out and what you can actually do about it in my books, Reset, Deep Leverage, and the Full Stack. They're not about cars specifically, but they are about exactly this pattern, the quiet removal of affordable options and the levers you still have access to. You'll find the details in the description below. Worth a look, especially if today's video is making something click that you've been trying to put into words for a while. Now, I promised you this gets worse before it gets better, and here's where the villain of the piece starts to show its face. Here's what these vanished brands quietly hand you, right now, this week, with nothing but the car you might already own or could buy for pocket money. When a brand pulls out of Britain, something strange happens to the cars it left behind. Their value drops through the floor. Nobody wants an orphan car, they think, because who will fix it? So a good, low-mileage Daewoo, Proton, Daihatsu, or even a late Chevrolet can be bought today for a few £100, sometimes less than you'd pay for a single month of finance on a new one. I'm talking about honest, running cars for £200 to £500. And here is the secret the modern showroom absolutely does not want you to know. Many of these orphan brands were built using parts shared with cars that are still on sale. That's the key that unlocks everything. Daewoo and later Chevrolet models shared huge amounts of their engineering with Vauxhall and Opel because they were all under General Motors. So the filters, the brake pads, the belts, the sensors, many of them cross-reference directly to parts you can still buy cheaply at any motor factor. Daihatsu shared a great deal with Toyota, which owned it, so servicing parts are far easier to find than people assume. Proton used Mitsubishi engines for years. The badge died. The mechanical guts live on, in cars still driving today, with parts still stacked on shelves. So the move, if you want to escape the price trap entirely, is this. Look for a vanished brand whose parts are shared with a brand that's still selling. Buy the orphan cheap, because the market has wrongly written it off. Then service it with the widely available shared parts. I know people running Daewoo-based and Daihatsu-based cars for a fraction of what their neighbors spend, and the neighbors have no idea the badge is even discontinued. That's not a trick. That's just knowing where the bodies are buried. But I told you the deepest surprise comes near the end, and it does, so let me get to the two names that make the whole picture click. The first is Datsun. Now, older viewers will remember Datsun from the 1970s as the cheap, reliable Japanese cars that first taught British buyers a budget car could actually be dependable. Nissan retired the Datsun name decades ago. But here's the part almost nobody remembers. In 2013, Nissan brought Datsun back to life, specifically as a brand for making genuinely cheap new cars aimed at families in developing countries who were being priced out of the market. It was a modern attempt to build the honest, affordable car the West had abandoned. And in 2022, Nissan quietly killed it again. The affordable car experiment was shut down a second time. Think about what that tells you. The industry knows perfectly well how to build a cheap, decent new car. It has done it twice under the Datsun name. It simply decided again that there was more money in not selling it to ordinary people. The second name is the whole reason this squeeze exists, and it's the one the marketing spent 30 years teaching you to want. It's the crossover itself and the small car it replaced. Which brings me to the finale I promised you, and where it comes from. If you go back to the records of the Society of Motor Manufacturers and Traders, and you compare what Britain bought decades ago with what it buys now, you find something remarkable. Back when a British family bought a car, the small, cheap car was the heart of the market. It was normal. It was expected. A working man could buy a brand new small car for a sum that mapped sensibly onto his yearly wage. There was even a motoring survey back in 1962, in the golden age of the affordable British car, when the little runabout was king and a new car was something an ordinary household could genuinely plan for, not a debt they carried for years. Now compare that with what the industry admits today. The average price of a new car in Britain has climbed to a level that swallows a huge chunk of a typical yearly income, far more than it ever did in that earlier era. Wages did not keep pace, not even close. So the honest arithmetic broke. And when the arithmetic broke, the brands that only made sense at the cheap end had nowhere to stand. Daewoo, Proton, Daihatsu, the Budget, Chevrolet, the Second Life of Datsun, all of them lived or died on that arithmetic, and the arithmetic was allowed to fail. Here is the recovered secret, the thing that ties it all together. The affordable car did not disappear because it was impossible to build. It disappeared because it was deliberately abandoned in favor of machines that earn more per sale. The proof is that companies keep proving they can build the cheap car, with Datsun, twice, and then keep choosing not to. The knowledge of how to make an honest, affordable car never died. It was set aside on purpose, because a market full of expensive cars is more profitable than a market full of cheap ones, even if fewer people can afford to take part. And that means the power to opt out is still in your hands this weekend, using exactly what I told you. The orphan brands the market wrote off are the loophole. They are the last of the genuinely cheap cars, built when affordability still mattered, sitting unwanted at rock-bottom prices, wearing badges no one else understands, running on parts that are still on the shelf. The very thing that makes them look like a risk, the dead badge, is what makes them nearly free. You are not buying a failure. You are buying the last honest car before the price trap closed. Let me name the rest of the fallen quickly so you know the full scale of what happened, because the count is genuinely staggering when you lay it all out. Daewoo, Rover, the original MG, Saab, Daihatsu, Proton, Chevrolet, Chrysler, Dodge, Lancia, Hummer, Cadillac, Infiniti, Nissan's luxury brand, which pulled out of Western Europe, including Britain, around 2019 and 2020 because it never sold in the numbers needed. Mitsubishi, backing away from 2020. Datsun, revived and killed. SsangYong, the Korean maker that fell into administration in 2020 and had to be rescued and rebranded. Smart, the tiny city car brand that was restructured and stripped back to almost nothing in Britain. Isuzu, whose cars vanished from British showrooms, leaving only its pickups. Brand after brand after brand, and when you sort them by what they had in common, the answer is loud and clear. Most of them lived at the affordable end, and the affordable end is exactly where the market decided to stop competing. That's more than 20 names, most of them gone or gutted within a single generation. Not because British drivers stopped needing cars, because British drivers stopped being able to afford the ones the industry wanted to sell them, and the industry decided the answer was to sell fewer, dearer cars to fewer, richer people and let the rest of us carry the finance or go without. I felt something settle in my chest when I finally understood that silver hatchback on the forecourt all those years ago. It wasn't a promise of the future. It was one of the last of a dying kind, the cheap, honest car being crowded off the road by machines designed to cost you more. The salesman didn't lie to me on purpose. He just believed, like I did, that affordable cars were here to stay. Neither of us saw the exits filling up. So here's what I want you to take away, and it's not about cars, not really. It's about noticing when something useful and fair is quietly taken away and replaced with something that costs you more and serves you less, and being the kind of person who refuses to just accept it. You are not powerless in this. The old, cheap orphan machines are still out there, and knowing why they were abandoned is the first step to using them. Now I want to hear from you, and be specific because I read these. Which vanished badge do you remember best? Was it a Daewoo with that fixed honest price? A rugged little Daihatsu? A Rover your family drove for years? Or a Saab you still miss? Tell me the exact model. And tell me where in the country you're watching from, because I want to know which of these ghosts still haunt which corner of Britain. Drop it in the comments right now, before you forget. And if you're the sort of person who suspects that a lot of what we've lost was taken from us on purpose to protect somebody else's profit, then you belong here with the rest of us who are digging it back up. Subscribe and stand with us, because next time I'm going to show you the specific small cars, still on British roads today, that you can buy for under £1,000 and run for a fraction of what your neighbor pays, including one orphan model that shares almost every mechanical part with a car, still selling in showrooms right now. You will not believe how cheap it is to keep alive. Don't miss it. You're still with me, and that tells me you're one of my people. Here's what I couldn't fit into this video. Inside the Old Ways Society, I pick up right where we stopped. In there you can ask me anything, and a real person, me, answers you myself. And you won't be alone. So many Old Ways folks are already inside. Just point your phone at the code, cancel anytime with one click,